Like most aggressive skaters, I grew up skating ledges. And this is how most of us learned how to grind, jumping onto an object and then jumping off. The first time I tried to transfer all of my grinds over to mini ramp, I was met with disappointment. Doing grinds on coping is a completely different feeling than jumping on a ledge. So today, I'm going to show you how I go about grinding coping and finally figured out how to unlock my top sole. I've taught dozens of street skaters how to skate transition, and while I might not be an expert, I've got a few tips that might help you get started. The first thing we're going to do is get comfortable with the transition. So I always like to recommend you don't do any turns, you just go forwards and backwards on the transition and get used to what that transition feels like. So the first thing we're going to do is stagger our feet. You don't want to have your feet parallel, you want to have one foot in front of the other. The reason for that is you want a wider base so that you have a little bit more stability when you're going up transition. Always keep your knees bent. You want them to be bouncy like springs. This will help you adjust to any changes in the transition, and it'll keep you from falling. When you're going backwards up a transition, you want to look over the foot that's furthest back. So the first foot that hits the transition is the one you're going to look at. So give it a few strides, one foot in front of the other, and try to pump yourself up like you're on a swing. Watch my arms. My arms really help. When you get to the top of that transition, you bring your body up with your arms. The first grind we're going to learn is the front side, and this is the grind that I always recommend people start with. There's an easy process to learning the front side. Start with the same pump that you've been doing. At the top of the coping, start tapping one foot onto the coping and come back in fakie. Once you get confident with that, put both feet up. Once you get confident with that, put both feet up and stall for a while. And then once you get confident with that, do a little bit of a carve, put both feet up, and you'll start grinding. Getting the fundamentals of the front side is going to help you immensely down the road. Most important thing is you want to make sure that you don't jump to your front side. When I learned how to skate transition, I only got about halfway up the transition and then just jumped onto the coping. And it worked. It was like I was skating a ledge. The problem is it really hurt me by teaching me bad habits for the future. You want to skate all the way up the transition to the coping. Place your feet on the coping, grind as long as you can, and then roll back in. No jumping allowed. You don't need to jump. You just pick up your feet. So next we're going to learn the backside. Fundamentally, it is the same as the front side for balance, but is a very different grind. You're going to do a 180 right at the top of the transition and lock on with both feet on your backside. It's the same foundational trick as the front side. The only change is that we're going to do a 180 before we hit the coping. So ride all the way up the transition. As soon as you get to that top, turn your shoulders, pick up your feet, and put your feet on the coping. Now that you're comfortable with the backside stall, we're going to try to drop in. This is something that a lot of people go to drop in when they first come to a quarter pipe, when they're just trying to learn. I would recommend just stay in the transition. You don't need this much speed until you know what to do with it. Dropping in is the same feeling as coming in from a backside stall. We're going to face the transition just like we're coming out of our backside. One foot on the coping at a time. Stay on that inside edge. Put the other foot on and roll in. When I drop in, I tend to do one foot in front of the other. So I'll put my right foot on the coping first and then put my left foot in the transition before the right foot. This gives me a little bit more stability, but there's no wrong way to do it. Most important thing to remember, and the reason why people usually get hurt trying to learn how to drop in, is you have to fully commit. Remember, you've got wheels on the bottom of your feet. If you put yourself on this transition pointing the right way, you're going to roll. There's nothing stopping you. Most important thing, keep yourself low, keep your legs bent, one foot in front of the other for a little added stability, and just go for it. All right, now we're going to try to grind the backside. All that you need to do is add a little bit more speed and carve the transition so that you're moving across the coping before you do your 180 onto the coping. The same rules apply. We're not jumping onto our backside. We're going to roll all the way up the transition until our feet almost hit the coping. We're going to turn our shoulders, pick up our feet, and lock onto that backside stall with a little bit of speed. And that will get us moving. Once you unlock that backside grind, you're going to be tempted to try all of your other grinds. Some of them are a little bit more difficult than others, but if you have that foundational carve and floating feeling, you should be able to get all of your grinds pretty quickly. The biggest problem I ran into with my other grinds was trying to stay on the coping. Either I would slide up on top of the deck, or I would miss low and I would just slide down the transition. Before you try to learn any other grinds, you should perfect riding the coping. I'm not sure where I first saw this, but I'm going to credit Josh Acosta for helping me understand why it's important to ride the coping before you learn any grinds. If you're skating street, usually when you approach a ledge, you're skating almost parallel to it. And you know that if you ride into the ledge, you're going to end up on top of the ledge. The same foundational problem happens here on mini ramp. If you don't ride along the coping, you're going to end up on top of the deck. And riding the coping is a great technique to get you used to the transition and off the deck. First thing we're going to do is we're going to practice our carve. We're going to try to get as high up on the transition as possible before touching the coping. You're looking for that weightlessness feeling. At the peak of your carve, you're going to have all of your momentum flying up, but your body's going to stay on the transition, and it's going to feel like you can just float. Once you're super comfortable with weightless carving, you're going to want to try to do the same thing, but one of your feet is going to go on the deck. So this is what I call riding the coping. You're not grinding the coping, but you're following the same path and you have the same feeling as if you were on the coping itself. You can see that my weight is balanced right on top of the coping, if anything, a little bit inside the ramp. This is the perfect balance that you need to do a good, solid coping grind. I always recommend shooting video of yourself when you're learning new tricks. That way you can re-watch the video and see where you're going wrong. So a few quick tips. If you find that you're ending up on top of the ramp, two things. One, make sure that you carve a little bit more. Really wait until you hit that weightless feeling. And second, make sure you're not jumping to the coping. If you start too low and you jump to the coping, your momentum will keep you flowing on top of the deck. If you're missing low and you're not quite getting to the coping, sliding back down into the transition, it usually means that you've got everything right. You just need to wait a little bit longer on that carve before attempting the grind. If you miss, don't get frustrated. Just ride the coping a few more times,
reset your brain, get yourself used to the carve and where you want your balance, and then try again. I've been struggling for years to get my topsole. It's one of those tricks that I've always wanted, and I always try it on transition, but I can just never get it consistent. Once I started riding the coping, I figured out where my balance should be, how I should be carving, and I finally unlocked consistent topsoles. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you learned something. Remember, I'm no master at skating transition, but I've skated it long enough to figure out what works for me, and I hope it works for you.